So Unit 1 from Forensic Science. Let's talk. Let's talk about Unit 1 and what you learned. So the objectives, the big objectives from this course. How do real-life scientists identify suspects? What are some of the responsibilities of forensic scientists? What are some of the specialty areas of forensic scientists? You were to learn about the history and development of the field, and then the relationship between forensic science and the criminal justice system. So I want to go over those objectives and make sure that everybody grasp those concepts. And then if you didn't, we can clarify them. So the first one, how do real life scientists identify suspects? Oops. All right. So can anybody give me some examples or some descriptions of how real-life scientists identify suspects? What were some of the ways in the lesson that were discussed? How do real-life scientists identify suspects? So I would like for you guys to respond. Catherine, Noel? All right, so I'm going to help you out. I'm going to get you started. Fingerprints. Oops, if I can spell it correctly. Fingerprints. Fingerprints was one of the ways that real-life scientists identify or help the criminal justice system to identify suspects or to help prove that someone is innocent. The fingerprints may not match up. Catherine, what kind of evidence? What kind of evidence collected by the police? So fingerprints would be an example. It could be blood. Could be a blood sample. Excuse me. Tried not to cough in your ear. Bodily fluids such as saliva, bodily fluids, hair samples, fabric samples or fiber samples. Anything else? What about trace evidence? What about things like footprints? Maybe there was some wet cement, maybe there was mud, or maybe it just hasn't been windy in a couple of days, so a tire track or a footprint was able to stick in the dirt. All of those things are examples of evidence that real-life scientists use. So the next question is responsibilities of forensic scientists. And let's say oops, didn't mean to do that. Sorry, guys. Let's mark through that because it won't let me edit it. So let's mark through it and let's retype it. So let's say, what are some responsibilities of real life forensic scientists? So what are some of the responsibilities? What are some of the things that real life scientists do? Collect the evidence with care. I like how you worded that. Collect the evidence with care. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so they have a responsibility to make sure that the evidence is properly collected, whether they do this themselves or whether they train other people on police teams to do this. Evidence has to be done with care. All right, what else? What about test? All right, so tests have to be performed correctly, or else the evidence isn't any good. So the evidence has to be collected with care. It has to be collected properly. It also has to be tested correctly. What else? What about laboratory procedures or expert witness? So they are an expert witness. Forensic scientists are considered to be an expert witness. All right. Laboratory procedures followed. So the correct laboratory procedures. You guys should all be familiar with the scientific method. Remember, with the scientific method, there's 7 steps. 7 steps to the scientific method, and they have to be done in the correct order, or they should be done in the correct order. Same thing with experiments. If you perform an experiment, there's certain steps and they have to be completed in the correct order. That's the same thing with laboratory procedures. All laboratory procedures have to be followed, whether it's for safety reasons or to ensure that the evidence is not contaminated. All of those laboratory procedures have to be followed to a T. Right? And then the last thing is the data. They have to analyze and interpret the data properly. All right, good. So that was that one. Let's talk about some of the special areas. What are some of those specific areas, those special areas? So what are some of those areas? I'm going to just go ahead and just start listing some of them off for the sake of time for you guys. Feel free to continue though in the chat with giving some of those. So we have pathology. Pathology was one of the specific areas. This is where we're talking about diseases and autopsies. Digital. Digital forensics was one of them, okay? And when we're dealing with digital forensics, we're dealing with digital evidence. We're dealing with things like electronic devices, computers, cell phones, so on and so forth there. All right. We also have anthropology. And just so you guys know, anthropology is a course that you guys can take. I think we offered it this semester and maybe nobody signed up or something of that nature. But they ID and examine, examine skeletal remains. So that would be kind of cool. Anthropologists are also able to identify the sex, age, and race of the remains. They're also able to do facial reconstructions. So showing the appearance of what somebody may have looked like if they were still alive. Anthropologists have to have some sorts of archaeological skills. Archaeology is another course. If you are interested, archaeology is another course that you can take. Just keep that in mind, anthropology and archaeology. I teach both of those classes, hint, hint. So, Catherine, you said psychiatry? All right, that is another one. Psychiatry, we're talking about the relationship between human behavior and criminal justice. Is somebody in the right mindset? Is somebody considered mentally ill? That's what we're talking about with psychiatry. Then we have the sociology. This is also considered criminology. What we're doing here is we're bridging language and cultural barriers. All right. Entomology. What's entomology? I think this is a course that we can offer. We haven't offered it in the past, but I think we can. So if you are interested, you could always let me know. Entomology, we're dealing with insects. So when a body starts to decompose, there's stages of development as far as the insects that decompose the body are concerned. Entomologists look at those insects to determine what stage of decomposition the body is in terms of giving some sorts of a time frame as to when that person died. All right, entomology, we have odontology. Odontology, we're talking about dental records. We're looking at teeth and dental records. And then we also talked about digital forensics. So those are some of the special areas. Anybody, yes, good job, Catherine. Anybody interested in any of those specific areas? Anybody think those areas are cool or think that they would be interested in going into some of those areas? So neither of you would be interested? All right, so real quickly, I'm just going to breeze through some of the history and development of forensic science for the sake of time. So the Chinese were the first to use fingerprints. There was a specific book they talked about. Be sure that you know that book. Toxicology, talking about poisoning or poisons, was developed by, and I am not even sure how you say this, Matthew Orfila? It's a foreign language. I'm not sure what language either. It looks maybe Swedish or German. But this is the father of toxicology. This came about 1814. So that tells you about how long ago this came about. 1830s. Not 1930s, 1830s, the Scottish were looking at the bullet samples. They were comparing bullet samples. So this was Scotland Yard comparing bullet samples. All right, 1800s, photography came into play as far as documenting the crime scene. All right. And then